Imagine drifting through the dark alleys of a small-town night, discarded and forgotten, when suddenly a pair of headlights pins you to the wall. A face flashes behind the glass, someone meant to uphold the law, but instead of rescue or a warm meal, they offer you a one-way ride to a place cloaked in secrecy. Little do these crooked officers know, their target isn't an average homeless man, but a Delta Force veteran trained for the most dangerous missions on Earth. In this jaw-dropping tale of power, betrayal, and redemption, discover how one man's hidden past explodes into the light and brings karma hammering down. Rain pelted the cracked asphalt of Division Street in the heart of Willow Creek, a modest town in the Pacific Northwest. Buildings dating back to the early 1900s stood shoulder to shoulder, their brick facades shining slick under the glow of old streetlights. This was a night when only the desperate or the dutiful would walk outside, and Isaac Ike Roberts was both in a way. Homeless for the better part of a year, he trudged along sidewalks littered with wet newspapers and leftover debris from the monthly farmers' market. He used to fight for his country, now he fought for scraps. Ike's eyes, sharp once but now sunken from weariness, flicked toward every shifting shadow. Old habits from a past life died hard. He pressed his back against the graffiti-stained wall of an abandoned bakery, trying to shield himself from the cold wind. A battered duffel bag, possibly his only possession, clung to his shoulder. Inside, he kept things that told the story of a man long gone dog tags and a single photograph of his unit in front of a building marked with the sign Fort Bragg, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. On most nights, Ike could find a spot under a bus stop or behind the local community center, but the weather had turned violent. His mind drifted back to days when the only thing that pounded harder than the rain was his own heartbeat during close-quarters training. He had worn the Special Forces patch and later served in Delta Force, the tip of the American military spear. That had been his identity once. But now, battered by personal loss and a few unlucky breaks, Ike was living moment to moment, invisible in a small town that never bothered to know his name. He had no idea that tonight would be the turning point, the moment the law, corrupted as it was, would collide with his lethal training. He felt a prickle at the back of his neck, an instinct hammered into him through years of service. Something was off in the silence. The drizzle muted the world, but he knew he wasn't alone. As the haze of rain parted, headlights flared. A police cruiser crept down Division Street, its engine humming low like a predator stalking prey. The high-beam lights froze him in place for a split second. He wondered if they'd just pass, but no. The cruiser slowed to a crawl, and the passenger window rolled down. A uniformed officer leaned out, face half hidden under the brim of his cap, scanning Ike from head to toe. Ike swallowed. In Willow Creek, interactions with the police rarely spelled a warm meal or a place to stay. A voice crackled, carried by the hiss of rain. "You, over there, you got somewhere to be tonight?" Ike took a small step forward. Something about the tone drilled into his gut. This officer wasn't interested in small talk or a welfare check. Ike licked his dry lips. "I'm just passing through," he replied, keeping his voice low and steady. He had learned from others on the streets that local law enforcement had grown less than sympathetic lately. Rumors swirled of work camps or county-sponsored shelters that sounded more like prison labor yards. People went in but rarely came out with a story to tell. The officer nodded to his partner behind the wheel. "Nowhere to go, huh? Hop in, we'll get you someplace safe." But everything in Ike's gut told him safe wasn't safe at all. His instincts flared up like a perimeter alarm screaming in the night. Yet, with the rain and the cold gnawing at him, he felt cornered. Maybe if he just cooperated, they'd give him a place to sleep and some food. He was in no position to fight the system. He cast one last desperate look down the empty street, wishing for an alternate route. The second officer leaned out, tapping the door. "Come on, friend. Don't make us force you." That final word, force, was all Ike needed to hear. Without waiting for another invitation, he took one step forward and got in the back seat. The door slammed shut with a deafening thud. A metallic click told him the child locks were engaged. The musty smell of old cigarettes and coffee permeated the air. They drove in silence for a while, radio static occasionally cutting in. Ike stared out the rain-lashed window, memorizing every turn. They passed the Willow Creek Police Department, but didn't stop. Instead, they continued straight, then veered onto a long, secluded stretch of road leading out of town. Farmland lined the highway, endless rows of soggy fields and the silhouettes of old barns. It was well past midnight, and not a single light flickered in the distance. "This ain't the station," Ike finally ventured. The officer in the passenger seat smirked. "We've got a different arrangement for folks like you," he said. The driver gave a short, humorless laugh. Ike noticed the faint reflection of something in the rearview mirror, a glimmer of satisfaction, or maybe excitement. It set every nerve on edge. As the cruiser rumbled down the deserted highway, Ike felt pinned between panic and the old methodical calm that had guided him through countless covert operations overseas. If these men were truly taking him to some secret work camp, he needed to gather intel and bide his time. Delta Force taught him to adapt, overcome, and if necessary, retaliate. Eventually, the cruiser turned onto a gravel road. No sign marked the path, and it seemed barely maintained, with potholes that rattled the frame of the car. Towering pine trees pressed in from both sides like looming sentinels, blocking out any glimpse of the moon. After about 20 minutes of winding through the dense forest, the headlights illuminated a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A rusted metal gate swung open at the approach of the cruiser, as though triggered by some invisible watcher. Beyond the fence lay a sprawling compound of prefabricated buildings, floodlights, and the occasional guard tower. It looked like a cross between a construction site and a low-security prison. Ike's chest tightened. He had seen plenty of makeshift bases overseas, but never expected to see something like this operating on American soil, especially not in quiet Willow Creek. The cruiser came to a halt before a large metal shed, and the engine cut off with a sputter. The officers led Ike out. The clang of the car door echoed in the still air. A single overhead lamp buzzed, casting harsh light onto a waterlogged gravel yard. A man in a dark green jacket approached, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, wearing a patch on his sleeve that read Dawson County Security. Ike recognized the name of the county they were in, but not the security detail. Strange. The broad-shouldered man nodded at the officers. "Another worker?" he asked, in a gravelly voice. "Yep," one officer replied. "Found him wandering around. Should fit right in." Then, without further ceremony, the policemen turned, hopped back into their cruiser, and drove off, leaving Ike alone with the green-jacketed stranger. A swift pat-down followed. They took Ike's duffel bag, rifling through it until they found the photo of him and his unit. The man held it under the lamp's glare, eyes squinting at the words Fort Bragg and Delta Force across the insignias. For a moment, Ike thought he saw the man's mouth twitch in recognition, but the expression quickly disappeared. He shoved the photo back into the bag and tossed the bag to another guard. "Welcome to your new home," he said, the corners of his mouth curling into a sneer. Ike felt a wave of dread wash over him. Now that they knew who he was, at least partially, he realized he would have to tread carefully. His training was a blessing and a curse. If these men were unscrupulous enough, they might try to exploit his skills. Or worse, treat him as a potential threat to isolate and eliminate. Still, Ike maintained his composure. Survival came first. The man in the green jacket motioned for Ike to follow him into one of the dilapidated buildings. Inside, narrow corridors reeked of mold and damp cement. Dim bulbs flickered overhead. The door opened onto a large hall lined with bunk beds, each bed occupied by men with haunted eyes and hollow cheeks. As Ike entered, all heads turned. These weren't criminals or convicts. They looked like the most vulnerable members of society, hobos, drifters, addicts. Their presence confirmed his worst fears. This was a forced labor operation orchestrated by crooked cops and whoever ran Dawson County Security. The first night blurred into day as Ike got little sleep. The bunk he was assigned had a thin, musty mattress, and the blankets barely shielded him from the cold. Guards patrolled the sleeping quarters like prison wardens, flashlights glaring in men's faces to ensure nobody tried anything. Before dawn, loud whistles jolted everyone awake. Ike fell into line with the others, guided to a mess hall where they received greyish oatmeal, a stale piece of bread, and watery coffee. In hushed whispers, some of the men around him gave scraps of information. They'd been picked up in the same manner, a routine vagrancy stop by local law enforcement, forcibly relocated here under the pretense of rehabilitation. But the truth was more sinister. They were used for all sorts of labor, clearing brush, sorting recyclable materials, even working construction sites owned by private companies. Some had been here for months. Ike listened carefully, formulating a mental map of the operation. The front gates were heavily guarded, and the entire compound was surrounded by fence and thick forest. Escape attempts had ended badly beatings, extended solitary confinement in a windowless trailer, or forced labor without even the meager meals they usually received. A silent fury churned in Ike's gut. He thought of men he had served with, how they had fought overseas to protect freedoms. Now, in the country he'd risked his life for, he was about to experience a brutal form of modern-day slavery. He felt eyes on him wherever he went. The boss in the green jacket, who introduced himself simply as Mr. Wyatt, seemed to keep tabs on Ike's every move. Ike pretended ignorance, faking a slight limp to appear less capable than he was. In the army, he had learned that camouflage wasn't just about blending into terrain. It was also about playing a role until the moment was right. Out in the yard, the sound of hammers on nails or rakes scraping across gravel was relentless. Under the watchful gaze of armed guards, Ike joined a crew tasked with unloading cargo from a delivery truck. Corrugated steel containers were crammed with building materials, sacks of cement, and barrels of chemicals labeled in a language Ike didn't recognize. Another piece of the puzzle. The owners of this camp were possibly engaged in shady business dealings, shipping in who knew what for their expansions or external contracts. Whenever he hoisted a heavy sack, Ike's mind churned with strategies. Was there a communications tower? Did the guards have any patrol schedule that left gaps near the perimeter? He knew every detail could be the key to an eventual escape, but an escape plan was only half of it. He also wanted justice for these men. He could slip away alone, but that would leave them behind, and something in Ike's conscience wouldn't allow that. He had lost too many brothers in arms to turn his back on innocent people now. On his second day, Ike found himself assigned to a work detail clearing fallen logs and brush in a remote section of the compound. A guard named Porter, a lean man with perpetually twitchy eyes, supervised them with a shotgun resting in his arms. Ike labored alongside a few other captives, including an older man named Henry, who had a persistent cough, and a 20-something drifter named Joel, who was nearly silent except for the occasional grunt of exertion. As Ike lifted a heavy branch and tossed it onto a pile, the guard's radio crackled. Porter stepped away for a moment, giving Ike a quick window to glance around. Beyond the fence line, he noticed what looked like an abandoned cabin. The thick brush had overtaken its walls, but it might offer a potential hiding place if he or others could get out. He kept working, meticulously filing the detail away. Suddenly, he heard the crunch of boots on gravel behind him. Turning slowly, he locked eyes with Mr. Wyatt. The man stared at Ike's arms, flexing as he hefted another branch. "You've got quite the physique for a homeless drifter," Wyatt commented. His gaze was suspicious. "Where'd you serve?" Ike feigned confusion. "Serve? I never said I served anywhere." He forced a shaky laugh, trying to appear defensive. Wyatt nodded. "Sure," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. He shrugged and turned away, but Ike sensed the confrontation was only postponed. Wyatt had recognized the army photo. If he hadn't already done so, he'd likely dig into Ike's background soon. Later that evening, as Ike was shuffled back to the bunk hall, he saw the flicker of a bonfire near another building. Around it, a group of guards seemed to be celebrating something, passing around bottles of whiskey. Nighttime was their free-for-all. Ike realized that was precisely the time they might be LAX in surveillance, an opportunity he had to exploit. But as he lay awake that night, an even more chilling realization settled over him. If Wyatt discovered Ike's true pedigree, that he was Delta Force, trained in advanced tactics, he could use Ike in far more dangerous ways, or he could decide Ike posed too great a threat and remove him permanently. Ike remembered names from his Delta days, men who could handle crisis with cool composure. He thought of Captain Ramirez from his old unit at Fort Bragg, a steady presence in the face of terror. Ike drew from those memories, reminding himself that no situation was insurmountable. He had faced worse, but perhaps never something this personal, this close to home. By the end of the first week, Ike had mapped out the routine. Up at sunrise, forced labor all day, watery meals, patrolled bunk halls at night. Some men beaten down for so long had lost the fire to resist. But Ike saw glimmers of defiance in a few. Henry, despite his frail appearance and chronic cough, had a bitterness in his eyes that spoke volumes. Joel, the silent drifter, seemed to watch Ike's every move with a cautious curiosity. One afternoon, they were lugging wood planks toward a half-finished structure near the fence. The air was thick with sawdust. Ike leaned close to Henry and Joel, speaking in hushed tones. "Have you seen any weaknesses in the fence line? Or places they don't watch closely?" Henry gave a faint nod. "At the southeast corner, near the old generator shack. The floodlights busted, but they haven't fixed it yet. We see a guard there sometimes, but he's lazy. Spends more time smoking than patrolling." Joel added quietly, "One more problem. They've got dogs. Even if you slip past the fence, the dogs'll catch your scent." Ike exhaled, glancing around to ensure no guard overheard. "We'll figure something out," he said. "Just need time." That night, Ike took a calculated risk. Slipping out of his bunk, he silently padded across the hall, where a small window provided a glimpse outside. He spotted 2 guards at the perimeter, flashlights scanning lazily. Another guard sat near a radio tower by the main office. The rest seemed absent, likely gathered around the bonfire again, indulging in their contraband whiskey. If they kept that pattern, there would be a 2-hour window every night with minimal oversight. What Ike needed now was a plan for neutralizing the dogs, cutting the fence, and getting as many men out as possible. But a part of him wondered, could they outrun the police in the aftermath? If local law enforcement was complicit, the entire area might be locked down once the alarm was raised. They needed proof, something that could blow this operation wide open and force higher authorities to intervene. The next day brought a twist Ike hadn't anticipated. In the middle of carrying crates of supplies to a storage shed, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled into the compound. Out stepped a middle-aged woman in a sharp suit, her posture radiating authority. She was accompanied by Mr. Wyatt and a younger man with a clipboard. The 3 toured the grounds, occasionally stopping to examine the workers. When they reached Ike's group, the woman fixed her gaze on him. "How's this one performing?" she asked Wyatt in a crisp tone. Wyatt smirked. He's strong, but I suspect he's holding back. Ike shifted uncomfortably. The woman's piercing eyes seemed to look right through him. Finally, she extended her hand, not to shake Ike's, but as if she was inspecting merchandise. "Lift that crate," she ordered. Ike complied, hefting a crate loaded with hardware. The woman nodded, turning away. Ike overheard her speaking to Wyatt. "We could use extra manpower on that hazardous materials contract with Redwood Industries. This one might be ideal for next week's shipment." Redwood Industries was a real conglomerate Ike recognized. They specialized in logging and mining, known for their controversial expansion into remote areas. Were they in on this forced labor scheme, or had Wyatt simply found a way to undercut legitimate contracts? The woman's name, he later learned, was Charlotte Massey. Rumor had it she was the liaison between the unscrupulous local authorities and corporations willing to pay for cheap labor. She seemed like a puppet master, pulling the strings behind the scenes, with Wyatt just another piece in her game. As the SUV departed, Ike saw an opportunity. If he could gather tangible proof photos or documents tying Redwood Industries to the work camp, he might be able to blow the lid on the operation. But that meant getting into the offices, where they likely kept records and digital evidence. A high-risk move, but if successful, it could end this nightmare for everyone. He resolved to try. That night, Ike feigned exhaustion early, allowing him to observe the bunk hall from behind half-closed eyes. Around midnight, he rose silently and crept toward the main corridor. A flicker of light drew his attention. He peeked around a corner and spotted Wyatt talking to a guard. A single phrase drifted across the hall: Delta Force, the mention of Ike's background. Ike's heart pounded. They must have run his name, discovered his service record, and realized they had a highly trained soldier in their makeshift slave camp. He retreated carefully, stepping back into the darkness. That changed everything. If they knew his skills, they might try to coerce him into specialized tasks, potentially threatening the other men to ensure his compliance. Or worse, they might see him as a threat to eliminate. Either way, Ike felt the countdown begin. Whatever he planned, he had to act soon. Back at his bunk, Ike spent the rest of the night forming a mental blueprint. He would retrieve evidence of wrongdoing contracts, invoices, anything linking the forced labor here to Redwood Industries or local officials. Then he would orchestrate an escape. The plan was high risk but necessary. He reached out quietly to Henry and Joel. Together, they whispered in the dark, forging an alliance. Henry offered a crucial tidbit. An older man named Ralph, who worked in the office as a janitor, might be able to grant them access or at least leave a door unlocked. Before morning, Ike had the seeds of a plan that drew on every ounce of cunning he'd learned in covert operations and every drop of empathy for the broken men around him. 2 nights later, Ike set the plan in motion. Henry faked a coughing fit severe enough to draw a guard's attention, providing a diversion while Ike slipped into a maintenance corridor. Joel, standing watch, signaled the all clear. Ike moved quickly through the dimly lit hallway, guided by Henry's vague description. He located a door marked Admin Office Authorized Personnel Only. He tried the handle locked. Crouching, Ike reached for a makeshift lockpick fashioned from a bent nail and a piece of wire, an old skill from survival training. The lock was cheap, and after a few tense seconds it clicked open. Once inside, he carefully shut the door behind him. The office was cramped, lined with file cabinets and a single desk topped with a computer. Moonlight spilled through a narrow window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. Ike rummaged through the cabinets first, scanning for anything that looked official: timesheets, invoices, shipping manifests. He found multiple documents bearing Redwood Industries' logo, referencing shipments of timber, metal ores, and hazardous chemicals. Payment schedules indicated the corporation was funneling money to a shell company known as Dawson County Consulting, presumably the front for Wyatt's operation. Ike's heart hammered. This was it, proof. enough to at least spark an investigation if leaked to the right people. He carefully folded a handful of documents and stuffed them under his shirt. Then he turned to the computer. The system was locked, requiring a password. Ike cursed under his breath, scanning the desk for clues. A yellow, sticky note clung to the monitor's frame, Sundansenanine 67. He typed it in. The screen opened onto a trove of emails and spreadsheets. For a moment, Ike considered transferring them to a USB drive, but there was no time. He pulled out a small digital camera he had found among the confiscated items in a storage crate earlier in the week. Quickly, he snapped photos of the emails displayed on screen messages referencing labor demands and pick-up schedules. Suddenly, footsteps in the corridor. Ike's blood ran cold. He flattened himself behind the desk, the office door handle rattling. A guard's voice, "Hello? Anyone in there?" Ike pressed himself into the shadows, praying the guard wouldn't come in. After a terrifying moment, the guard moved on, muttering something about a faulty door. Ike let out a silent breath. Time to leave. He retraced his steps, making sure to lock the office door behind him. Joel was waiting at the corner, his wide eyes showing relief at the sight of Ike. Together, they hurried back to the bunk hall. Henry was in his bed, feigning restless sleep. Their stolen evidence was safe. Now, all that remained was the harrowing task of escape and the gamble that Ike could get these documents to someone who cared enough to act. Plans quickly took shape. Ike conferred with Henry, Joel, and a few others who still had the strength to attempt flight. They aimed for the darkest hour before dawn. They'd cut through the fence at the southeast corner, near the old generator. A small group of watchers would distract the patrolling guard with a fabricated fight among themselves. Meanwhile, Ike would neutralize the guard near the tower who oversaw the dogs. The entire window couldn't be more than 10 minutes. Ike felt the old adrenaline coursing through his veins. It was reminiscent of infiltration missions. He silently mouthed a mantra to calm his nerves. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. When the night came, everything moved in concert. A staged scuffle broke out in the yard, prompting the guard on duty to radio for help. Ike took that moment to sprint across the compound's dimly lit expanse, hugging the shadows near the barracks. He heard the excited barking of dogs, the alarm in their voices stoking fear in his fellow escapees. But Ike continued on, sliding behind the kennel building. There he found a single guard, slump-shouldered, smoking a cigarette. Channeling silent takedown skills, Ike snuck up behind him and clamped a hand over the guard's mouth while driving an elbow into his temple. The guard went limp. Quickly, Ike located the kennel locks. With trembling fingers, he latched them from the outside. The dogs barked louder, but now they were contained. He then darted toward the fence line. Joel and Henry were already there, cutting through the chain link with a pair of bolt cutters swiped from the tool shed. Their hearts pounded in unison, breath fogging the cold night air. One by one, men slipped through, ignoring the scratches from twisted metal. A distant shout and a piercing alarm told them they'd been discovered. Floodlights roared to life, sweeping across the compound like search beacons. Now or never, Ike slid through the gap in the fence. The undergrowth beyond was thick and clawed at their clothes. They stumbled through branches, hearts in their throats, disoriented in the dark forest. Behind them, the work camp buzzed with chaos guards yelling, dogs howling, flashlights dancing across the trees. But Ike led them deeper into the woods, following the faint glow of the distant moon, forging a path toward freedom. They hiked for hours, pushing past exhaustion. Henry's cough worsened, and Joel ended up supporting him. Others fell behind, too tired or wounded. Ike realized they had to find shelter and possibly medical help. Dawn began to break, casting pale light through the pines. Eventually, the group stumbled upon an old service road. Rusted road signs told them they were still miles from the nearest town. They decided to split up to minimize detection. Ike entrusted some of the stolen documents to Joel, instructing him to keep moving and find a way to contact someone outside the county. Ike himself carried the digital camera, determined to personally deliver the photographic evidence. The others spread out, each heading to different corners of the region, hoping to avoid the inevitable manhunt. Just as they parted ways, the growl of an engine cut through the crisp morning air. A lone pickup truck rattled up the service road. Its driver, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt, saw the ragged state of these men and slowed down. Wariness flickered in his eyes, but he recognized desperation. With shaky kindness, he offered them a lift to the next county line. Some clambered into the bed of the truck, Henry among them. Ike and Joel exchanged a final nod, and Joel climbed in as well, clutching the documents. Ike lingered behind, deciding he'd travel alone. The driver asked if he was sure. Ike nodded. "I'll find my own way. Just take care of them," he said softly. The truck rumbled off, leaving Ike standing there amid the quiet forest. He watched the tail lights until they disappeared, then turned to vanish into the woods again. Later that day, Willow Creek's sheriff's department erupted in uproar. Over a dozen men from the forced labor camp had escaped. Local cops and Dawson County security were put on high alert. The search parties roamed the countryside, roadblocks sprang up along highways, and a flood of misinformation poured into local news, painting the escapees as dangerous criminals on the loose. Wyatt lurked behind the scenes, phone pressed to his ear, trying to corral law enforcement into swift, brutal action. But Ike had already slipped past their net. He made his way north, hitching rides and traveling off main roads. He kept the camera hidden under his jacket like a sacred relic. Through a contact from his old army days, Ike reached out to an independent journalist known for exposing small-town corruption. The journalist, Maria Delgado, agreed to meet him in a discreet cafe in a nearby city. Maria listened, rapt, as Ike recounted the chilling details of the work camp. She scrolled through the photos on the camera, eyes widening at emails linking Redwood Industries to forced labor. Her expression darkened when she saw the documents referencing police involvement. "If even half of this is true," Maria said, her voice trembling with anger, "this is the biggest scandal to rock this region in years." She promised to go public as soon as she authenticated the evidence. Meanwhile, Joel and Henry managed to find refuge at a local church shelter. A kind pastor helped them contact the FBI, describing the horrors they'd endured. With the additional testimony from multiple victims, federal agents couldn't ignore the storm brewing in Willow Creek. Within a week, federal vehicles descended on the quiet town. Agents from the FBI's Seattle field office raided the compound. They discovered dozens more captives, half-starved and traumatized, along with reams of incriminating files. The dogs were confiscated, the fences cut open. Wyatt was arrested on sight, eyes blazing with fury as men in suits slapped handcuffs on him. Charlotte Massey, the woman with the sharp suit and chilling gaze, was apprehended in her luxurious suburb hours later, her shock obvious as authorities took her away. Redwood Industries released a hasty statement denying any knowledge of wrongdoing, but as documents and emails came to light, it became clear they'd knowingly financed at least part of the scheme. Local law enforcement, including the cops who had picked up Ike on Division Street, found themselves under federal investigation. Sheriff Leary of Willow Creek tried to distance himself, claiming ignorance. But a paper trail and eyewitness testimonies implicated him in backdoor deals with Massey. Many of the rank-and-file officers who participated in rounding up homeless people faced suspensions and indictments. The entire department came under public scrutiny, its name tarnished. Public outcry surged, leading to calls for state oversight or complete dissolution of the corrupt department. News outlets pounced on the story, featuring interviews with the rescued workers. The pictures of the fenced camp, the battered men, and the shady corporate contracts ignited nationwide outrage. People who had once passed by the homeless without a second thought now saw them through different eyes. Foundations began funneling funds into local shelters and outreach programs, hoping to ensure such an atrocity never recurred. Ike observed from a distance, slipping in and out of the public eye like a ghost. He gave a single on-camera interview to Maria Delgado, standing outside a federal courthouse. He refused to show his face or use his real name, but he spoke plainly. I fought for this country, and I believed in its ideals. It breaks my heart to see those ideals betrayed by the very people who swore to protect them. His voice cracked. But this isn't over until every person responsible is brought to justice. Justice, it seemed, would be swift. Prosecutors leveled charges of kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy, and multiple labor law violations against Wyatt, Massey, and their associates. Redwood Industries executives faced depositions, their reputation in tatters. The cops who had cruelly abducted Ike and others for a few extra bucks in under-the-table payments now stood in the dock, their badges a mocking reminder of vows broken. For Ike, it was a hard-won victory and one that left him feeling empty. He slipped away as quickly as he'd arrived, heading off to an uncertain future. A battered duffel bag on his shoulder, he left Willow Creek behind. He wasn't sure where he'd go next, only that he'd keep fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. As the dust settled, the entire town grappled with the grim revelation that real monsters can hide behind uniforms and corporate logos. And while Ike's past remained shrouded in mystery, the echoes of his Delta Force training and his resolute moral compass had uprooted a dark conspiracy, saving countless lives from modern-day enslavement. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey, where shadows of corruption met the unbreakable spirit of a Delta Force veteran. When the very institutions designed to protect us are compromised, it reminds us we all have a responsibility to shine a light on injustice. In Ike's story, we witnessed how a single individual's courage can ignite a chain reaction of truth and accountability. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, please remember to like this video, share it with friends who appreciate a good dose of drama, and subscribe to our channel for more immersive stories that challenge the boundaries of right and wrong. By supporting this content, you become part of a community that believes in standing up for what's right, no matter how dark the shadows might be. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more riveting tales.